Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. I am Dr. Cervantes and today is our first session of the course that is about the English novel. In today's session I would give you an introduction to the course and an introduction to the genre of novel itself. Well, before I move forward, I would just quickly like to share something about me as a teacher. I have a PhD in English, and apart from my other interests that include my interest in research, particularly in the areas of bilingualism, gender, media and identity, I have interest in literature as well. And when it comes to literature, novel is one of my favorite areas, because it provides us chances to peep into the possibilities of different aspects of human nature. And this course is going to provide me an opportunity to share my interest and my knowledge whatsoever I know about novel, particularly the English novel and the chosen novels that we would be doing with you in this course. As far as the course is concerned, giving an introduction to you about the course, I would say that the novel course is mainly concerned with the English novel from the 18th and 19th century, which is rich in diversity, creativity and popular appeal. The course explores the rise of English novel as an essential literary genre. It starts with an introduction to the novel, its origin and definition. It also includes elements of the novel, its development and aspects of the novel. The course includes the works of major novelists of the era, namely Henry Fielding, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy. Thus, the first novel that is covered in the course is the cheerful, moralistic writing of Henry Fielding. I'm talking about the novel Joseph Andrews. This leads us to explore the perfection of the novel in Jane Austen's Emma. This is the second novel that I have selected for you. Then Great Expectations is the third novel that we would do in this course. Great Expectations is written by the moralist and reformist Charles Dickens, and we would critically examine this. Finally, the perennial work of Thomas Hardy, Tess of the D'Urberville, written towards the end of the 19th century, would be explored. So moving through all these texts, we would look at the origin and development of novel, how it passed through different phases, and how the characteristics related to those stages of development are reflected in the selected novels that we would cover. As far as the aim of the current course is concerned, the aim of this course is to make students enjoy and appreciate the structure and content of the selected novels by reading between lines with a critical eye, to develop in them, that is in the students, the ability of textual analysis and critical interpretation of the English novel in the wider socio-cultural and philosophical context. Coming towards the objectives of the course, I would say that the objectives of the course include the following: to introduce each of the selected novels as a reading activity for interpretation and analysis, to enable the students to observe the chronological development in the genre of novel, and to make the students comprehend the structural and thematic aspects of the English novel. With this, we move to the details of our today's session. Before I would start the teaching part of today's session, I would quickly like to share what I'm going to talk about today. Well, since this is an introductory session of the course, in today's session, as I have already given the introduction to the course that you're going to read, and I have shared the aims and objectives of the course, now I would move on to the novel, the genre of novel itself. I would start with the definitions of novel. We would see how with the help of different definitions, we can add our clarity to or our concept of novel. We would look at novel as a genre and genre-specific characteristics or qualities that are peculiar or particular to novel. We would also look at the history and origin of novel, especially English novel. What were the circumstances, what were the conditions, what was the background in which it emerged, it developed, and how it has passed through different phases as it has reached this stage today. I would also introduce you to different types of novel. My main focus would be to introduce you to the initial types that were introduced at the early stages, and the more modern and postmodern types of novel would not as such be included, because later on at some stage, when and if you would be reading modern novel, they would be covered there. Dear students, in order to understand what a novel is and what are the general parameters of the novel, you need to understand a few things. We would explore it in terms of genre. Well, as far as the genre of novel is concerned, it is fiction. Genre means kind or type. So what kind of or what type of writing it is? It is a fictional writing. It is based on imagination. And of course, it is a narrative. It is mainly storytelling. When we come to the style is prose. It is not written, for example, in poetry. And as far as its length is concerned, it has an extended length. These few features determine the genre of or the basic kind or type of writing what novel is. With this, we come to a couple of definitions of the novel. Novel is defined by different people in different ways. Here I have a definition by Kennedy. A book-length story in prose whose author tries to create a sense that while we read, we experience actual life. So if you focus on this definition, there are a couple of things that you need to notice. It is a book-length story. So it is quite long a story, quite lengthy a story in prose. Again, this is the genre-specific characteristic of novel, that novels are always written in prose. And the author tries to create a sense of experiencing actual life as we read it, which means that it is not real, it is not based on reality, it is just based on the imagination of the author. However, it is presented in such a way that it becomes lifelike, it seems actual. Here is another definition that is given by somebody: an extended fictional narrative usually written in prose. I would say it reinforces what is said in the first definition. The use of the adjective extended shows again its length, and it is of course fictional, it is based on imagination. And this definition includes the term narrative, which means it is written in narrative form, and usually it is prose. Well, here are two more definitions that would add to our clarity on the concept of a novel. The first definition is by Lubbock, Percy Lubbock. The definition says, an imaginary work in prose of a considerable length which presents as real certain characters living in a given environment and describes their attitudes, fate, and adventures. Now, apart from what this definition shares with the previous two definitions, a couple of more things are added here that are very interesting. It presents characters that are real, that are lifelike characters, that have some semblance with the truth of life and with the characters in real life. And in a background, in a given environment where these characters live, this novel as a genre has the quality that it describes their attitudes, feelings, emotions, fate, and adventures as they go through different things. John Gardner, on the other hand, if you look at the bottom of this slide, has given a very, very interesting definition. According to this definition, the novel is like a symphony, in that the closing movement echoes and resounds with all that has gone before. So it is more a philosophical kind of definition that compares a novel more to music notes, where the ending notes, they bring the strands together and they re-sing what has already happened. By looking at all these definitions, we can notice all the different ways in which one can define the novel. The most important literary genre, novels are basically just products of writers' imaginations. These definitions emphasize various aspects of novels, such as real and lifelike characters, rising of conflicts, and presentation of themes, etc. The universal idea that the novel should be believable is one of the unique qualities or characteristics of the novel, and it explains its popularity as a literary form. This believability, this ability of being able to relate to real life, this is what makes it of interest for the readers. Well, the novel has various unique qualities or characteristics that distinguish it from other types of prose. I would one by one discuss a few important characteristics or qualities of the genre of novel that would add to your clarity, and later on, as we would be going through the selected novels, you can apply each of these characteristics to those selected novels, and you can see how these characteristics are very much there and how these qualities or attributes are at work. The first quality that I would like to talk about with reference to the genre of novel is its length. The first quality of novel, as I said, is its length. Novel is always quite extended. Although there is no definite rule as such on the subject of length, it is generally agreed amongst writers and publishers that the length of the narrative must be good enough. Well, generally maybe more than 100 pages or so, but as I said earlier, there is no definitive kind of formula for that. If it is less than that, if it is not that lengthy, it is usually referred to as a novella, such as Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. शायद आपने पढ़ा भी हो अपने BA के level पर, and George Orwell's Animal Farm. Again, I am not sure, but maybe you would have read it somewhere in your intermediate or your bachelor's course. Both of these are of comparatively shorter length. Another important quality or characteristic of the genre of novel is that a novel always has emphasis on the character or characters that are presented in the story of the novel. Since a novel is longer than a short story, the length of a novel allows the author to give the reader a much fuller description of the characters and to introduce more than one conflict. Therefore, the reader can better understand the characters' motives for action or inaction, relationship with others, and their own personal feelings, dreams, fears, apprehensions, hopes, etc. So, mainly, novel is an extended story of a character or of some characters. Yet another important characteristic of a novel is its structure. Usually, novels are structurally more complicated. A novel has more than one theme, conflict, point of view, or plot. It often has subplots. Well, discussing plot in further detail, I would say that plot is what happens in the story. It is actually the organization of the story or its structuring within the novel. The plot is what happens in the story, and if you just look at this diagram that I have just taken from a net source for you, if you look at this, what you would notice is this interestingly shows common plot structure, which is just like a roller coaster ride that climbs slowly up a big hill and then quickly drops down at a sharp edge. Now if you notice, you see, ये देखिए slant में ऊपर जाते हुए slanting movement है. It is very difficult movement from exposition, where the characters are introduced, where the story is started, gradually and slowly moving up, reaching the top point, that is the climax, and from the climax you see a sudden downfall, quickly dropping down at a sharp angle. A story begins with exposition, action rises to a climax or high point in a work and then falls to a resolution or denouement. And what you notice is that the phase from exposition to climax, it is gradual, whereas from climax to this resolution or to this denouement is comparatively sharper and quicker, as this arrow as well shows. There are a few more important things with relevance to the plot of novels, especially when it comes to the conflict that is presented that makes the whole action take place. In early novels, plots concerned on three different types of conflicts. These three major conflicts all dealt with how the individual viewed himself or herself in relation to society, to himself or herself, and to other individuals. So the whole conflict in the plot of a novel would either be around person versus society, or person versus self, or person versus person, that is the other individual. Well, setting is a very, very important characteristic or trait of the novels. Setting means the background or the backdrop to the story that is provided by the author. If you just think of a drama, a stage drama for example, the background of the stage, the backdrop that is provided, it makes or it creates some sense for the action that has to take place on the stage. In the same way, in the novel, a particular kind of setting or backdrop is provided that is created in the narrative form by the author to provide a background where a story takes place. So mainly setting is where and when a story takes place, time of the story when it takes place, time of day or year, geographical location, climate or weather, immediate surroundings of characters. Well, setting serves a lot of purposes in a story. It, for example, can serve as a backdrop. It can be a supporting element in the novel that supports the actions of the characters or the thoughts of the characters, or it can be antagonistic in role, which means it can just provide the oppositions to what happens in the novel. As you would go through the 4 selected novels, you would see different types of settings. Sometimes the setting would remain almost the same. Sometimes there would be 2 or 3 major settings that you would change during the course of the novel. For example, as you would go through the novel Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, what you would see is that there are 2 or 3 major settings in which the whole action takes place. You would see Pip living in the marshes in the rural area, and then from that setting going to the urban setting of London, and then coming back. In the same way, when you would look at the novel Emma, for example, there you would see that the main setting is of Highbury, where the whole action would take place and there would not be much change of the setting. In contrast to Emma, as you look at Tess, when you would go through the novel Tess of the D'Urberville, you would see that the main setting remains the same. However, within the same geographical area, I would say of not more than 100 miles, the major characters would keep on moving, and we would be shown different actions of these characters taking place in the backdrop settings that vary according to the needs, according to the actions, and according to the moods of the characters, from green, beautiful, lush, grassy lands to the barren, desolate areas, to the harsh, stony areas to show the change in the nature of moods of characters and the actions. With this, I would come to another important characteristic or quality of a novel, that is its theme or themes. Theme is the central idea in a literary work which serves to unify the story. It is what the author has to say about death, love, hope, courage, morality, society, etc. This is the main message, I would say, of the story as well. Every element of the novel, that is plot, point of view, setting and character or characters, they contribute to this theme, that is the major message that is to be conveyed through that novel. Well, themes are found in all other types of genres as well, for example in novella, in short story, in poetry and almost all the genres. But in a novel, the beauty of it is that more than one themes, interconnected themes, overlapping themes and sometimes conflicting themes can be presented within a work. As we would go through the 4 selected works, what you would notice is that each work has more than one themes embedded within it. Well, with this we come to the character. What is the significance of a character in a novel? Well, a character is a person in a literary work, and a novel has most of the times more than one characters. There is a set of characters. I would say almost from half a dozen to a dozen characters that play their role in the setting of the novel to promote the idea or the theme that is to be presented. The main character is called the protagonist, whereas character that is in direct conflict with the protagonist is called the antagonist. So the protagonist and the antagonist and the sets of people who support either the protagonist or the antagonist or are connected or related to them in certain ways, in certain relations or through certain actions. This is what makes the whole, what I would say, the set of actors within a novel. Now, talking about the relationship of plot with characters, I would say that plot explores characters in conflict to understand their own humanity. Well, another quality of a novel is the complexity of plot. Unlike the short story, a novel will often have more than one major conflict within the plot. Often the author is interested in developing a plot in which the main goal is for the character to better understand his or her own humanity or place or status in the society. The conflict, however, can be internal or can be external. Well, dear students, point of view plays an important role in a novel. Author's choice of narrative for a story. As I have already said that a novel is always in a narrative form. Now, who is going to narrate? Who is going to be the narrator of this story? This is what we call point of view. A story can be told in different ways. Point of view refers to the author's choice of narrator for a story. A story can be told by, you see, the author himself, by some character, by an omniscient, omnipresent narrator, etc. Novels are unique in that they allow for many different views of an event, whereas in short stories there is usually one view. In first person point of view, the narrator is a character in the story. The narrator or the one who tells the story may or may not be reliable in first person narratives, because the narrative is a character within the story is likely not entirely objective. I felt so, I thought so, this happened to me. When story is told in this way, when later on you would be doing the selected novels with me, you would see that Pip himself is the narrator of his story when it comes to Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, the novel that we would cover in the course. As far as second person point of view is concerned, second person point of view directly addresses the audience with the use of the pronoun you. Second person point of view pulls us into the story by making us one of its characters. Here the narrator would write it like this: you can see this happening to this or that person, you can see how the mist is rising, you can see how the rain is falling, you can see how somebody is entering the room in a secret way, whatsoever. So by using this second person pronoun you, the reader is directly addressed and is made a part of the story. This leads us to the third person point of view. With the third person point of view, the narrator is not a character in the story and is basically outside looking in. As an omniscient, omnipresent person, third person point of view can be written in a variety of ways. In third person limited, the narrator is limited to what one character knows or observes. With the third person multiple viewpoints, the narrator has access to the view of more than one character. Finally, in third person omniscient, the narrator is all-knowing and has access to the character's thoughts, feelings and motivations. As you would, for example, go through the story of Tess in the novel Tess of the D'Urberville written by Hardy, you would see there Hardy as a third person narrator, as an omniscient, omnipresent writer or narrator, would tell us a lot of things about the feelings, emotions, reasons, hopes, apprehensions, motivations, etc. of the characters. Dear students, another important aspect that I would like to discuss with you with reference to the characteristics of novel is novel and verisimilitude. What is verisimilitude? It is the semblance of truth. The semblance of truth in a novel is verisimilitude. A novel has recognizable settings and characters in real time. According to Hazlitt, it is the close imitation of men and manners, the very texture of society as it really exists. What I would like to say is that at the outset I said that novel is a fictional work that is purely the creation of the mind of a writer, that is purely based on the imagination of a writer, and it has actually nothing taken from real life. However, this quality or characteristic of verisimilitude makes it more interesting for the reader, because no matter that all the events, happenings and even the characters that are presented in a novel, they are all imaginary, but they are real life-like. This lifelike quality makes us believe in these characters and the actions of these characters. This also generates our interest in them. In fact, the novel emerged when authors fused adventure and romance with verisimilitude and heroes that were not supermen but ordinary people, often insignificant people. So novels are the stories of common people, common ordinary happenings of lives, and this is where we as common readers can identify ourselves with these characters and their actions, and that is why we take more interest in reading novels. Here I would quickly compare a novel to a short story. Well, a novel is generally of a comparatively longer length, say of 50,000 words or more most of the times. Many characters are found in a novel. The story is complex, as I already said, that it has a multiple leveled plot, complex plot, and there is a deeper understanding of life or of individuals and their actions. When we compare this to a short story, what we notice is that a short story is comparatively far less lengthy. It can be of, say, 5,000 words or less in general, though there is no specific formula about that. Since it is shorter in length And by the way, the very name, the very title of this genre, short story, the use of word short as an adjective in this tells us that it is of comparatively lesser length. So the scope for introducing characters becomes less. Most of the times just a few characters or even one character is there who is focused. A short story focuses on one event, not a lot of events. It also focuses on better understanding of one event or character or one particular happening in relation to one particular character. This comparison chart may make it easier to see actually the differences between two common forms of storytelling, the novel and the short story. Because novels are lengthier than short stories, novels feature additional characters, more complex plots, and a deeper exploration of life or characters within the text, as I have earlier said. In contrast to this, the short story is more focused on one character or a few characters, one major conflict, one theme or one event, and it provides a simple understanding of the main character or event instead of the bigger picture of man's place in society, multifaceted characters, or an extended period of time in characters' lives. So just think of what you have read in terms of Urdu or English novels, and now if you look back at your personal reading of various novels, that would give you a clear idea of what I mean by differentiating between these two types of narratives or storytelling genres. With this we come to the history of the novel. If we trace the history of the novel, actually all through human history what we have seen is that human beings have always been interested in storytelling. Narrating events, telling stories has always been a part of human culture. So from the oral telling of myths, history and stories, this is actually we have the origin of novel, where in the history actually it started. This oral tradition of telling stories and myths and history led to the writing of written stories, written storytelling in the form of epic, for example. Epic is a long narrative, a long poem that tells about the heroic deeds of the protagonist. Through the times, this written storytelling gave way to written prose fiction concerned with adventure known as the romance. Now this word romance or this term romance is taken from French language. The French word for the novel is roman. So actually the term romance does not mean what it means today's, that is a love story. Rather, romance in this sense means a particular kind of written prose fiction that deals with imaginary adventures. And from that written prose fiction concerned with reality or actual life. So from the imaginary adventures, it moved on to the written prose fiction that was more concerned with actual life, and the English word for new is novel. Novel means new or unique as well. Going mazid iski depth mein jaate hue, mazid looking at how novel has developed, I would say that going into the depth of how the novel get its start, I would say early people depended on the oral tradition to pass their histories, beliefs and stories from one generation to the other. People would sit together and they would share the stories from the hearts of one generation. These stories would be shifted to they would be transferred to the other generation. Various cultures wrote epics, which are long narratives, jaise maine pehle bhi kaha, poems. These are narrative poems such as Beowulf or the Odyssey. Next, consider romances as a literary genre. This genre not a very common one, and according to the modern definition of romance, which means love affair or romantic attraction, this genre was comparatively different, and romances were essentially comprised of a series of adventures and included ideas like Arthurian legend and knighthood. So the kings, the knights and their stories, their adventures, they were written. Prior to the mid-18th century, the novel as a common accepted form of prose actually did not exist. There were certain realistic reasons that served as a background for why it didn't exist. Most people were illiterate, and without a middle class, there really wasn't a market for the novel. The affluents were more interested in biographies, journals, memoirs, and historical texts. The members of the working class were poor and illiterate. Social and economic changes were needed to create a market for the novel. What I mean by all this is that the middle class did not exist till almost, I would say, the mid of the 18th century. Either this class did not exist or it had a very limited number of people. The result was that either they were very rich people or they were very poor people. Ab jo bahut zyada ameer log the upper class, the elite class, they were not interested in reading novels. Why they were not interested in reading novels? Novels are the stories of common people, ordinary men, and common happenings in their lives. Well, since these themselves were not common men or ordinary people, they were not interested in the lives of ordinary people. On the other hand, then there were poor people. These poor people were the working class people who were not only poor, they were also illiterate. Now, either they could not read, or even if they could read, they were so much caught up by their, you see, circumstances. They were too much indulged into earning their bread that they could not have time, and they did not, of course, have money to buy novels and to read them. So everything that takes place there on the literary scene actually is a product of the times. That is why so far novel was not there on the scene. Social and economic changes were needed to create a market for the novel, and we would see that with the passage of time from here onwards, there would be certain social and economic changes that would create an environment for the birth and for the flourishment of novel. Nothing happens overnight. It takes time for a genre to take birth and to get established. And there are certain precursors that pave the way for a genre. The narrative precursors to the novel are what I'm going to discuss with you right now. Heroic epic, ancient Greek and Roman romances and novels, Oriental frame tales, Irish and Icelandic sagas. These are different types of narratives. Storytelling के different तरीके थे, different types थी, जो जिनकी यहाँ पर if you look at the slide, you would see some examples I have also given of each of these. So they were common, and actually they created the background in which novel took birth. All of those led towards medieval European romances, Elizabethan prose fiction, travel adventures, novellae and moral tales. Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, for example, is one of the moral tales that remained quite very much popular during its times. So all these precursors to the novel, they contributed not only in terms of form and shape, but also in terms of giving a structure and giving a placement to novel. Along with these literary happenings through the times, there were some socio-economic changes that were coming, and the Industrial Revolution was one of the major reasons of the rise of novel. When we talk of mid-18th century England, actually there was a lot of change that was taking place. Urban life was getting more popular, it was becoming more prominent. People were shifting from rural areas and from the countryside to the to the cities, and the growth of industry was one of the reasons of this shift. Instead of working on the land, instead of the traditional, typical agricultural, farming-based economy, there was a shift in the economy from agricultural to industrial economy, and the growth of industry led to the change in the lifestyle of people, in their interests, and in their living. With the growth of industry, there was a birth of new middle class. Now, the middle class that I'm talking about was a class that was more, what I would say, what was more representative of the type of class that is presented in novels generally. This class had money now, this class had time, and this class had interest in the type of writings that later on got shaped in the form of novel. When we talk of industrial revolution and social changes, these social and economic changes occurred as a result of the industrial revolution. The colonization of the Americas gave England an abundance of raw materials, which led to the creation of a merchant class, members of which sought their success in the profit made from trading goods. Technological advancement was also taking place simultaneously. Technological changes such as new machinery defined what we now call the Industrial Revolution. With it came the growth of cities and a change in the entire social, political and economic structure in England. From the creation of industry, a new social and economic class of people emerged that is called the middle class. They gained their wealth through the ownership of factories and the institutions that supported them. Thus, the social issues of old money versus new money emerged. जैसे हमारे यहाँ ना कभी भी गाँव में देही इलाकों में there would be जागीरदार्स, there would be landlords, there would be people who would be the owners of huge areas. In the same way, in England, the traditional agricultural system was based on this system where the owners or the landlords, they would have big pieces of land and they would be considered the upper class people. However, with the change that was brought through the Industrial Revolution, the concept of what I would call elitedom also changed. Now, the people who were not the owners of land, the people who were not, the owners of that much money, generation after generation, now they would earn a lot of money through trading, through, work in factories and through establishing mills, etc. These were the people with new money. Now, when these people had money, they would consider themselves equally elite as the old money holders would consider themselves. This brought a change and a clash in the society, and novel is a product of these times. In most of the novels, you would see all these changes that were coming in. For example, as you would go through The Great Expectations, as it is written by Charles Dickens, you would see that the protagonist, Pip, would aspire to have great expectations, to get them fulfilled. He would like to go to London to be a gentleman. So this journey of Pip is representative of the journey of the lower class people from the rural areas and from the agricultural settings to the urban mechanical life, with the inspirations and aspirations to become gentlemen and to become more modern. Well, in terms of the production of different types of literature also, there was a certain kind of a background to the rise of the English novel. The restoration of monarchy in 1660 in England after the Puritan Commonwealth, that is 1649 to 1660, encouraged an outpouring of secular literature, and from the religious curve to the more secular curve, you can see the change that was coming on the literary scene. Appearance of periodical literature such as journals and newspapers, literary criticism, character sketches, political discussions, and philosophical ideas were more common during these times. Also, the increased leisure time for middle class led towards the opening of coffee houses and saloon society, where people would sit and would read and would talk and would indulge into literary activities. Growing audience of literate women also added to the strength of the new genre of novel, because now the women who earlier did not used to have any education, now they were literate, they could read, and to spend their time, their leisure time that they had in ample, they would prefer to read novels. This promoted the new genre of novel. So dear students, what we have noticed so far is that there were quite a number of factors that contributed towards the birth and growth of novel. When it comes to the birth of novel, we can see that there were certain factors that were interconnected or interlinked, and they led towards the birth of this genre, which include, as you can look at this diagram, new market for the novel by 1700s, spending money available for entertainment, creation of the middle class, more leisure time available, increase in the number of people able to read. With the change in the times, with the change in the social setup, with the change in the economic conditions, there was a change in the reading habits as well. Before the emergence of novel, people primarily read plays, poetry, essays, and religious texts. With the development of the novel, the longest form of prose writing was developed. The new middle class found themselves with the required education, wealth, and time to enjoy this form of entertainment. So the sole purpose of novel, of writing and then of reading, was entertainment, providing or having entertainment. As now there were larger number of literate people who had money to spend on books, who were the members of the emerging middle class, a new market was created in which the novel was able to flourish. Dear students, it is important for us to understand novel as a representative genre that was concerned with the real problems and lifelike situations of middle class. We are talking of the times when a traditional conservative social pattern was followed. Generally, men pursued careers in law or in the military or in business, but women were expected to marry ahead of one's class to improve her place in society. Jane Austen's works show this. For example, in her novel Emma, as you would go through the novel, at many time points you would see that this social class distinction and the relationship between social status and marriage, the institution of marriage, was very strong, and women would aspire to have their marriages in comparatively a class that would be financially stronger than them and that would be higher than them on the social pedestal. Because this was the only possibility for women to raise their social status, they could not work, they could not prove themselves otherwise. As for a real picture of what daily life in industrial England was, like Charles Dickens' Hard Times and Great Expectations, you can see in these what was happening. Hard Times presents the situations that factory workers faced: long work hours, extremely low wages, child workers, and very dangerous working conditions. Even in Great Expectations, you would see Pip as a child working as an apprentice. Dickens' goal was to alert the middle and upper classes to the inhumanity, the real problems and situations that the lower classes endured or they went through. Well, tracing the history of the novel, now I would come to certain individuals who played important role in this regard. The first person I would like to refer to is Cervantes, and Cervantes, Don Quixote 1547 to 1616 was Cervantes' times. It was one of the precursors of what novel is today. It is the first European novel, part 1 published in 1605 and part 2 in 1615. And we can call it a psychological portrait of a midlife crisis that satirizes medieval romances, incorporates pastoral, picaresque, social and religious commentary. Talks about what is the nature of reality and how does one create a life. Later on, it gave a lot of input into the creation and design of novel through the times. Well, here we have, you can see the picture, here we have Defoe, the founder of modern English novel. As the founder of modern English novel, I would say Daniel Defoe made a lot of contribution because he was a master of plain prose and powerful narrative. He wrote Robinson Crusoe in 1719 and the text is a travel adventure. In 1722, Moll Flanders was written, that is a picaresque novel, and later on it added to the new modern novel as it took shape and form through times. Daniel Defoe was born in 1660 and who died in 1731 actually established a middle class perspective. Most will agree that Daniel Defoe and his novel Robinson Crusoe and later on his novel Moll Flanders actually set the structure and themes of the novel for the upcoming days. Born in 1660 as a butcher's son, Defoe soon rose above the expectations of social class by the encouragement of his nonconformist father and was sent to Charles Morton's Academy in London for a proper education. His father intended for him to enter the ministry just as many educated people did in those days, but he embarked on a career as a journalist. Ultimately, creation of believable characters and realistic situations enabled him to meet readers' demands, thereby becoming the founder of the modern English novel. A few important works that laid the foundations of the English novel later on are, I have already talked about Don Quixote. I would move on to The Princess of Slaves by Madame de Lafayette, love letters between a nobleman and his sister, that is written in 1683, then Robinson Crusoe, 1719 England, Moll Flanders I have already referred to, 1712, and A Journal of the Plague Year, 1722, again by Defoe. Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, that was written by Samuel Richardson. I would in a while talk in detail about Samuel Richardson and his contribution towards the birth, growth and development of novel. And in reaction to Pamela, that was written by Richardson, Henry Fielding wrote Joseph Andrews and Tom Jones, and these novels further established the basics of the structure of novel writing. Well, dear students, here you can just quickly have a look at different types of novels: picaresque, epistolary, sentimental, gothic, historical, psychological, realistic, natural, regional, social, adventure novels, mystery novels, science fiction, and magical realism. They not only show different facets of novel writing and different types of novel writing, but also each one of these contributed in certain ways towards the development and growth of novel through the times. When it comes to picaresque novel, as I have said, the word is derived from Spanish word picaro. It deals with the life of a wanderer. a road who would just be moving around, traveling on the road and being indulged in different adventures, would experience a variety of things. Usually these novels are autobiographical chronicle of a rascal's travels and adventures as he or she makes his or her way through the world, more by wits than industry. Well, the first novel that we would cover is Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding, and it is written in the Picaresque tradition. Well, Picaresque novels are episodic and they are loose in structure, and there is a logical reason for that. They are episodic because the main character would be an adventurer who would be traveling from one place to another, to yet another, and to yet another. And each episode would cover one part of the journey or one small piece of the journey from one place to the other. And since there is no singular setting to the novel where the whole scene would be set, rather there would be a lot of shift and change from one place to the other, and a lot of adventures would be incorporated. Naturally, there would be a structure that would be comparatively very, very loose. Picaresque novels are highly realistic. There is a detailed description and uninhibited expression, and there is a lot of satire on different social classes. This leads us to yet another type of novel, that is epistolary novels. These novels are the narratives in which most of the times the narrative is told in letters by one or more of the characters. So a compilation of these letters in the shape or form of one long narrative would make a novel. It allows author to present feelings and reactions of characters, brings immediacy to the plot, allows multiple points of view because different characters would be giving their own views or their own perspectives on something through their letters. And the novel falls into the area of psychological realism as well. Well, a few minutes back I said that I would talk about Richardson's and Henry Fielding as the fathers of the English novel. So here it is. Samuel Richardson's, born in 1689 and who died in 1761, is considered to be one of the fathers of English novel. Different works that he contributed, Pamela in 1740 and Clarissa in 1747-48 are important contributions, and the tradition in which they are written is epistolary, sentimental, morality tale. Mainly Pamela is the story of a servant resisting seduction by her employer, and later on you would see that Fielding wrote a novel that was an answer to this, or that was in response to this novel. Here you can see the picture of Henry Fielding. He is the first author or writer or novelist of whose novel we would read in this course. He was born in 1707 and died in 1754. He wrote different works: Shamila 1741, Joseph Andrews 1742 and Tom Jones 1749 are important. Again, Picaresque tradition is followed. The Picaresque protagonist is shown who would be traveling from one place to the other, to yet another. In Joseph Andrews, the novel that we would cover in our course, actually again what you would see is that Joseph Andrews, the main character, the protagonist, would have a journey from the countryside to the urban area to London, and then he would be on his journey back, and all the adventures, all the happenings in the Picaresque tradition take place on his way to London or from there back to the countryside. Henry Fielding himself has described this novel as comic epic in prose. If you recall, I said that epic is long narrative that deals with the heroic deeds of the main character, but Henry Fielding has called it comic epic written in prose form. As we would come to the first novel, I would discuss this aspect in detail with you. And of course, the element of parody of Richardson, as I have said earlier, is very much important. From Fielding onwards, novel established very speedily, got popularity very rapidly, and we see quite a number of individuals contributing in so many different ways. One of the important names is of Jane Austen and the novel of manners. The type of novel Jane Austen has written, these novels dominated by the customs, manners, conventional behavior and habits of a particular social class, often concerned with courtship and marriage, realistic and sometimes satiric as well. These types of novels had a focus on domestic society rather than the larger world. As you would go through Emma, written by Jane Austen, you would find that all these characteristics were applicable. Yet another type of novel that I think is important for you to know is Gothic novels. These novels are characterized by magic, mystery and horror. These are exotic settings that they present, and in these exotic settings of medieval oriental backdrops, actually the whole action takes place in a mysterious way with black magic and supernatural powers at work. This type of novel was originated in 1764 with the work Castle of Otranto that was written by Horace Walpole. Yet another type of novel is the novel of sentiments. This type of novel is the one which has the characters and thus the readers have a heightened emotional response to the events connected to emerging romantic movement that was taking place at that time. Lawrence Sterne, 1713 to 1768, and the work Tristram Shandy that was written 1760 to 68 is one of the important contributions in the stream of the novels of sentiment. Then the Bronte sisters, especially I would say Emily Bronte and Charlotte Bronte, they have contributed in this type of novel. If you ever happen to get a chance to read any of these novels, you would see that supernatural forces, black magic and such elements are at work. The Brontes, their family, a portrait of the sisters is just shown here for your interest. In terms of novels, I would say that Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, they transcend sentiment into myth making. That is why I said that there is a lot of magical elements related to this sentiment part. Wuthering Heights plumbs the psychic unconscious in a search for wholeness, while Jane Eyre narrates the female quest for individuation. And these novels set a new trend in novel writing. Historical novels are yet another type of novels. These novels reconstruct a past age, often when two cultures are in conflict. Fictional characters interact with historical figures in actual events, and Sir Walter Scott, 1771 to 1832, is considered to be the father of the historical novel. जिस तरह से हमारे यहाँ है ना, नसीम एजाजी के लिखे हुए नॉवल अगर आप पढ़ते हैं, हिस्टोरिकल ट्रेडिशन में लिखे हुए ना, और एक हिस्टोरिकल इवेंट को लेके उसके गिर्द इमेजिनरी कैरेक्टर्स के साथ पूरा एक हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड क्रिएट किया हुआ होता है. So those kind of novels I am talking about here. Dear students, here for your interest, I have just pasted a picture of Charles Dickens, who was born in 1812 and who lived till 1870, and one of his novels would be included in our course, where we would talk in detail about Dickens' writing style and his contribution in the development of the form and style of writing novel. One of his major contributions is that by including varieties of poor people in all his novels, he has brought the problems of poverty to the attention of his readers, and people could relate themselves more, that is why I would say, to his works. Dear students, with this we come to an end of our today's session. Here is a list of all the works that I have used for designing our today's session for you, and I hope that this would have added to your knowledge of the basics of the genre of novel. Before I close today's session, I would just quickly like to share a review of our today's session. In today's session, I introduced our course to you. I shared the aim and the objectives of this course, and then we moved on to the genre of novel. I started with various definitions of novel, and I established certain important points with relation to novel by basing them on these definitions. I discussed important characteristics, qualities, or unique attributes or qualities of novel as a genre. I also traced the history and origin of novel, especially English novel, and for your clarity, I also introduced some important types of novel so that you could have an idea of these different types. I hope this basic information would help you have some background that you can use as an underpinning for your future reading of the novels that are selected in the course and that you would do during the course. With this, we come to an end of the session. Thank you very much.